Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Regeneration Manchester webinar. I think first and foremost, I just really want to say I hope everyone's well and healthy and enjoying the easing of the social restrictions. I personally am very much so. This webinar has been organized by the Association for Consultancy and Engineering's Northwest Group, and my name is Jordan McLaughlin. For those who might be unfamiliar with the Association for Consultancy and Engineering, or the ACE for short, which I'll refer to it throughout this webinar. The ACE is an organization that represents the views and voices of over 400 member organizations that work in the built environment. There's region-specific groups spread across the UK. So there's an ACE Northwest group, ACE London and Southeast, ACE Wales, etc. And there's also complementary emerging professionals groups that follows the same structure. As I mentioned, my name's Jordan McLaughlin, and I'm a civil engineer at a fairly small, but certainly growing consultancy called Burroughs Graham. And I'm also the chair of the ACE's Emerging Professionals Northwest Group. I really want to thank everyone for joining this morning. As I said, it's quite an early one. I'm an early riser anyway, but I know some people who are joined today are less so. And it's great to see Patricia join, which is awesome. So we're all good. We've got a full set of panelists. I'm going to allow all panelists to give themselves a proper introduction and kind of talk a little bit about the work they do. But I just would like to personally and professionally thank the three panelists today: Len Grant, Matthew Doran, and Patricia Bartoli. Just a bit of housekeeping just for those who haven't been on an ACE webinar before. This webinar will be recorded and available on the ACE's website and YouTube shortly after the webinar. And I think most importantly, following the introductions of all the panelists, we'll be kind of having hopefully a bit more of an open and flowing conversation. And we really want those who have joined us this morning to feed in their thoughts, comments, and questions. So I understand there's somewhere on your screen that you're able to type in questions. Please do listen closely. And if you do have any questions, please send them in and they'll be filtered through to myself, and I'll make sure they're fed into the discussion. I think that's housekeeping and a vague introduction. Len, I'm going to hand it over to you shortly. I think you actually are the inspiration behind this webinar. So many thanks to you. In particular, you've recently published a book at the back end of last year, I believe, called Regeneration Manchester, 30 Years of Storytelling. And I know you quite well in a personal capacity, but you sent me the book and I just feel like it captured Manchester beautifully. I'm from Hume personally. Yeah, great. That's the book. And maybe you want to open a few pages, Len, because I do think some of the pictures you've taken are wonderful. But yeah, I'm from South Manchester, from an area called Hume. And as I say, I'm a civil engineer, so I work in the built environment and want to change the landscape through my work. And I think a combination of both those things means it's a real pleasure of mine to be steering today's discussion, with it being about regeneration in my beloved city of Manchester. So I'm really looking forward to discussing with you three shortly. But before we go into Len's introduction, we do have a short clip from one of your pieces, Len, and it's from a lady called Agnes. I believe she was a resident in the New Islington area. And New Islington, along with Hume and many other parts of Manchester, are areas that have been, in my opinion, drastically regenerated over the years. In my opinion, also for the good. But I do think Agnes touches on kind of the social aspects and some really important and poignant kind of points that myself and Hamish, who kind of led the organization of this webinar, just felt really embodied and captured some of that. So Chetna, if you can pull up the clip from Agnes, and then Len, I'm more than happy for you to piggyback straight off that and introduce yourself.
Sure.
There was three girls from work came with me to see it. They thought it was unbelievable. It was like a palace because it was so big. Oh, they couldn't believe it. Oh, Agnes said, and look, you've got a porch at the front. Oh, it's gorgeous, you know. to me, that was the loveliest house we'd ever been in. It was marvellous. It was really lovely. Why they pulled it down, I'll never know. There was nothing wrong with them houses, only they let them go. As soon as they started putting families in, I don't know, they call misplaced families or somewhere for them to stay for the time being, who couldn't care less. That's when it started to go down. Then the drugs came on. But nobody came to sort drugs out. We were just left there, having to face everything. Nobody bothered. So then everybody just gave up hope. Do they understand what they're doing when they pull these houses down, you know? What they're doing to people? Now, okay, they've got a lovely name for it now, regeneration. But in the old days, they would have called that a slum clearance. At the bitter end, it was terrible. We didn't want to go. We had to move. Anyway, yeah, they started taking everything out. And then my friends started coming slowly. And I had 3 cats. Now, 2 of them I know were safe. I'd had them packed away. But I didn't know where the other little one had gone. I thought he was upstairs somewhere. Anyway, the friends was there. And somebody left the door open, and the men come to pick the sweet up, and poor little Bobby flew out. And I've never seen him since. He's still over there somewhere. After that, I came over to Guest Street. Everybody they were unpacking everything, you know. So everything was all laid out, lovely, the curtains and everything, what I'd picked, and the carpet was there, all my old furniture, it was lovely. It was just like what I'd left in Spinning Jenny. There seemed to be no change. But I was I thought, this is it, I'm finished here. I thought, if I last another week, it'll be a miracle. The way I felt I was desperate. It must have been about 6 weeks, 8 weeks that I really felt down. And then suddenly I started to I thought, I've got to get out of this, you know, else if I start getting depressed, I've had it. Just came round out of it, and I'm just getting back to, I'm not back to square one by any means, but I'm on the road back to normal.
Thank you very much, Jordan. So that was Agnes. That was made some years ago when the Cardroom estate became New Islington. I was just looking back through the dates as it was playing. Sadly, Agnes died nearly 10 years ago now, but she stayed in that new house for quite some while and enjoyed being with her new neighbours. But I think it illustrates, certainly from one point of view, how stressful regeneration can be. Certainly was for Agnes. But it kind of, for me, it kind of illustrates my approach over 30 years of telling stories, which is to tell the people's stories. So in a minute or two, I'll just go through some photographs. I'll try and get 30 years of photographs in 2.5 minutes. But before I do that, just give you a little bit of an introduction to me. So I started off in 1990 as a photographer, a self-taught photographer, just when Manchester's regeneration was kicking off and it became my subject. And I've had since then a series of commissions from different organisations, from the council, from housing associations, from regeneration agencies and developers to follow particular stories. So I did work on the building of the arena, the Bridgewater Hall, Ancoats, a whole load of stuff around New Islington, just looking through the contents of this book. And I did the demolition of Main Road Football Ground, the building of the Lowry Imperial War Museum. There's a whole chunk of stuff, some of which you'll see in a few minutes. So as I say, my emphasis has been on people rather than buildings. And I was sort of accused once of being an architectural photographer because there's obviously lots of buildings in my photographs. But I always consider myself as a portrait photographer, really, a documentary photographer where the backdrop has been Manchester's regeneration over 3 decades. So once I did a lot of iconic buildings that were happening in the 90s. And then I went into neighbourhood regeneration with New Islington and East Manchester. And then I did some of my own personal work around social regeneration, social exclusion rather, and did work with undocumented migrant families and those with substance abuse, etc. And more recently, I've kind of put down my camera to some extent and picked up a pen and paintbrush and have started telling stories through sketching, which sounds like a departure, but for me, it's not really. It's kind of just a different medium in which to tell stories. And as Jordan said, I spent last summer, the lockdown summer, putting together all my projects in one book, which is called Regeneration Manchester. That's the end of the plug. I've done over the years, about 25 different books. So books about New Islington and East Manchester, books on the building of the Bridgewater Hall, etc. So I've only got 5 minutes to introduce myself, and I've probably had 4. Let me just give you a quick share screen, a quick run through of some of my photographs. So this is just this is the building of the arena, the Bridgewater Hall. I've got to speak fast because I've actually put these on a little movie, so I don't overrun. This is the Lowry being built. The Keys Theatre in the Lowry. That's recognisable as the front of the Lowry. The wonderful colours. The Lowry completed before Media City. I photographed the runway 2 being built, Imperial War Museum North, which was a fascinating building to photograph. That's me at the top of the air shard. Sorry, that's me photographing at the top of the air shard. And this is the building, rebuilding after the IRA bomb of 1996, the creation of, I can't even talk fast enough, they're going so quickly. This is Ancoats. This is the, I'll pause on this one. So this is the Cardroom Estate, which was where Agnes lived, which was demolished to make way for New Islington. Residents of New Islington, lots of storytelling around New Islington, asking people what they thought of the area before and during. A couple of books over a 7-year period. This is, I'll just stop on this one as well. So this is a view from Ancoats Mills looking across New Islington, and that creation there is the canal that links the Rochdale and the Ashton. Each one of these pictures has a story, which obviously I haven't got time to tell you. New Islington, the social housing. I'll just pause on this one again. View across New Islington before anything really, well, once it was cleared, the social housing you can see in the background. That's a fascinating picture. That's what that one's in the book. And I photographed the demolition of Main Road football ground. And this is East Manchester, where I photographed for about 5 years. The Bee of the Bank sculpture, that those of you of a certain age will remember. The younger ones might not. The Commonwealth Games, of course, 2002, which is really significant in terms of regeneration. This is the Co-op's new head office. That was fantastic to photograph. The Trafford Town Hall, and here are some of my sketches around Mayfield in Manchester. The latest big regeneration story for the city. I kind of really like this picture if we talk about consultation later, so keep that one in mind. And one or two, oh, I say I wasn't going to plug the book anymore, but here's one or two shots of the book. So that's me. Sorry, probably more than 5 minutes. I'll leave it there.
Len, I really, really appreciate that. And I think you touched on some really interesting points that we'll get into later when we open up kind of the wider discussion. Yeah, we're getting to some of that, but thank you for your time. And I do urge and encourage everyone to check out the book. It's a beautiful piece of art, and massive praises to yourself for putting that together. I did want you to touch a bit more on Hume though, because I'm from Hume, and in my opinion, it's a question that I actually have for you later, but I'd like to actually know where you feel has most successfully regenerated in Manchester. But I'll let you think.
I only get so much in 5 minutes. I already did about 8, so sorry about that.
No.
We'll talk about it later.
Okay. Okay, moving on. Patricia, I think I think personally and professionally, your journey sounds really interesting. I haven't met you personally, and I don't even think I managed to speak to you before this webinar, as opposed to Len and Matthew. So I'm really interested to hear your kind of personal introduction for yourself. So over to you.
Thanks, Jordan. And Len, if I can just say, there's some fantastic photographs in there. And I would have liked to have heard about Hume, actually, because that was I didn't grow up there, but it was one of my old stomping grounds. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that at the end. So I won't go into too much detail about my background. I've been at the council a long time. I've done lots of different jobs. My first role, I started in the race unit when we had one, and loved working here, and then went on to do lots of different things. I did want to focus really on my contemporary role. So what I'm working on at the moment is on the recovery of the city following COVID. You know, our focus as an organisation is around managing COVID, containing COVID, and then focusing on the recovery of the city and supporting growth. So I'm the SRO for economic recovery, and the centrepiece of that is our economic recovery and investment plan, which we launched last autumn following the spending review. And the recovery plan focuses on two things, really, two main things: early actions to cushion the impact of the pandemic and the downturn on Manchester people and businesses, and then an investment programme framed around 4 key themes of innovation, city centre and public realm, residential retrofit, and North Manchester. And it's our intention that we use that plan very actively to power the recovery by creating new jobs and acting as a catalyst for further investment. We've developed the plan in partnership with the private sector and other partners, the universities. It builds on our economic assets, our Manchester strategy, which I'm sure you've all heard about. And the strategy is focused on themes of people, place and prosperity, and our drive to become a zero carbon city by 2038. And the long-term investment proposals include a programme of over 30 projects with an investment ask of nearly 800 million to support the reinvigoration of the economy. And we've been using that to lobby government and to look at funding strategies and plans aligned to that, so we can start that recovery process. So that's my intro.
No, I really, really appreciate that, Pat. And there's certainly a lot of questions, both coming in and already kind of pre-prepared through the AC's kind of wider network, that I definitely will look to focus some of those to yourself, given that experience. Finally, we also have Matthew Doran from Manchester City Council also joining us today. Matthew, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks Jordan, and thanks for having me. I've been in Manchester since 2004. Wasn't born and bred here. I grew up in a small town in Shropshire in the West Midlands. But when I got to like 21, 22, I quickly realised there was not a lot there for me in terms of work or interest, really. So around that time, myself and a couple of friends, we wanted to move somewhere, and we looked at either Birmingham, where we spent a lot of time in our youth, or Manchester. And I was really drawn to a place where there was a lot of change happening and a lot of positive energy and a lot of vibrancy. And I was really drawn to Manchester, and I quickly wanted to be part of that change and part of that regeneration. So very quickly, I joined the City Council, thankfully, through a sort of backdoor entry that you could get back in those days. You could join as a temp and very quickly get taken on permanently. It's much more difficult to join the council these days. But I guess I got sidetracked a little bit and got involved in a lot of different projects that weren't related to the built environment. But at the same time, learned a massive amount about the city and about the organisation and about the players that are involved in what's going on in Manchester over the last 2 decades or so. But for the last 5 years, I have been primarily involved in residential growth in the city. So working on our ambitious residential growth strategy, we aim to deliver 3,500 new homes every year in Manchester up to 2025, at which point I'm sure we'll refresh it and aim for even more new homes, because the population here is growing very, very quickly. We've got about 8,000 to 10,000 people moving into Manchester every year. We're currently delivering more than 3,400 homes every year. I think just over 4,000 were delivered in Manchester last year, and we're on track for 3,500 to 4,000 for each of the next 4 or 5 years too. The largest residential growth scheme that we've got is what was referred to as the Northern Gateway until very recently. We recently rebranded it as Victoria North, and that's 150 hectares of predominantly brownfield land and some underutilised land. There is land where there is residential communities, and I was reflecting on what Agnes was talking about in Len's video. Some people might have seen the BBC documentary Mancutopia last year, where people from Collyhurst were interviewed. And we do, of course, sympathise with where they're coming from and, you know, the types of housing that are in Collyhurst. But I think what's really driving the regeneration is there is a need for a lot more homes. You know, we've got a huge waiting list of people that need affordable housing. We've got a lot of people moving into the city and they want a certain type and typology of accommodation. Some of the communities that Len was talking about and Collyhurst, they were built at a time when Manchester's population was going very quickly in the wrong direction. So it was falling very, very quickly in the 1950s, 60s and 70s. And the housing reflects that. It's very, very low density. It's very inefficient use of space and use of land. Flip that where we are today and the population's going in the opposite direction. And we really need to use that space much more efficiently. Certainly the spaces within the city centre and on the edges, because they are sustainable locations, close to all the transport links, close to the employment centres in central Manchester and around. So Victoria North, we're aiming for 15,000 new homes over the next 15 to 20 years. We are working in partnership with a private developer, Far East Consortium, FEC, who will deliver the lion's share of those new homes. Well, part of my role in strategy is, whilst housing is the ultimate output, we need to be thinking about everything that goes into making livable neighbourhoods and a livable place. And that's, you know, your parks and green spaces, it's your transport and movement and highways, it's the health and education. So how do we plan the schools and deliver those at the right time and fund those appropriately, and the same with the medical facilities and health, but also social value, and how do we derive social benefit from this physical transformation, because that's absolutely key. And I think more so than ever now, where the council doesn't have large regeneration teams and infinite resources as it might have done 15 to 20 years ago, we are looking for consultants and contractors and developers to play a much greater role, but there's still a role for the City Council to kind of coordinate and shape that agenda. So that's a big part of what we're doing now and for the next decade, I'd say.
Matt, I hugely appreciate that, and I think you really very well set the context for this discussion that's about to take place now. I think Chatner's posted in the box to feed in any questions that the audience have. I see a few came through, and it's a question I can't actually see. It's from Richard maybe, and it's a similar question to what I was going to ask Len, to kind of open this discussion in the first instance, which is, where do you feel Len has most successfully regenerated in Manchester, and why? And you're on mute.
Where has it most successfully regenerated?
Yes, and why?
Well, I can only really speak for those areas which I've been involved in. So I can comment on, as you mentioned, Hume. I followed the regeneration of Hume between 92 and 97, and New Islington and East Manchester. What I would say is things have got better progressively. I mean, I can now look back on 30 years of following regeneration, and so in terms of consultation with people, what happened in Hume would have been an improvement on what happened previously in like slum clearances, where people were literally with very little consultation moved to overspill estates and things like that. So in Hume, consultation was good. In East Manchester and New Islington, consultation was better, and people were involved in the decision-making process. I think that's always a challenge for whether it is the council, development, regeneration agencies, developers, in how to bring the people who you're doing this for along with you. And sometimes it can be people who literally still living there, or if you're starting from scratch, you don't necessarily know who the people who are going to be living there are. But what I would say is, I think those places that have engaged better with their residents of a particular area have done better. And what's happened in East Manchester, a lot of the initiatives that were put into place there in consultation with residents were rolled out not just over the rest of the city, but were used as case studies for other areas around the country as well. Mm-hmm. So it's a hugely difficult question, and that's my best shot at an answer.
Mm. No, I appreciate that, and I think it's really interesting because I think many people have touched on many aspects, and Pat mentioned she started in the council in the race unit, which it was kind of a random comment, but it's actually very relevant to this conversation, in my opinion, especially when you consider what Matthew said, in that more and more we need kind of the advice or guidance of consultants, and I'm a design consultant. So if you tie both of those two things together, you start to paint a wider picture here in terms of the people. Not only do we need to consult the public or the people benefiting from these schemes, but the people actually delivering them, the people designing them, have to be able to consult these people and understand where they're coming from and understand what it is they're saying to them, and that's where, for me, diversity and inclusion within the built environment, there's a huge push towards it at the moment, and rightfully so. You know, an architect from a really posh area down south might think, let's have these beautiful spiral staircases coming down from this block of flats. That sounds great, obviously. But me growing up in Hume when Hume wasn't so nice, and having friends that are, you know, involved in different things in life, that I might understand better that, oh no, those spiral staircases are actually just going to be a perfect environment for people that maybe sell drugs to have shelter. And do you know what I mean? And have that understanding to understand that, oh no, that spiral staircase isn't going to just look great. It's actually going to be used in a way that maybe doesn't have much benefit. So for me, it's really, really important for designers, people at the council, everybody working on these huge schemes that ultimately serve people, to understand people's lives, people from that community. So Len, just about on to what you were saying, I think you're mentioning some really interesting stuff.
Well, I mean, Jordan, I have to say, and you mentioned it earlier, that, you know, we go back a few years, and I'm delighted, frankly, to see you on a panel of professionals talking about regeneration. And I've always thought this over the years, and there's no way around this. Generally speaking, the professionals, and I include myself in that, come from backgrounds which are different from the areas which are being wholesalely regenerated. When you're talking about, you know, you look at somewhere like Didsbury, and you don't have whole swathes of Didsbury being regenerated and knocked down, etc., etc. But that's what happens in other areas of town. And I've always wondered about the impact of whole communities' mental health when this happens. As middle class people, we can control where we move, when we move. And, you know, people always say moving house is a stressful situation. Imagine a whole area that has been regenerated and how stressful that is. So I don't think anyone would disagree that local people have to be engaged with, and I'm using all the wrong terminology, talk to and listen to. Nobody would disagree with that. It's how you do it, and how you do it in an effective way.
Definitely. And Matt, I'm not sure if you want to add on to that, but, you know, I guess we're touching on the social value aspect, and surely there's things in place that ensure so values added in a social capacity and not just commercial capacity when looking at big regeneration schemes like Victoria North, for example. Do you have anything to add on the kind of social value front there?
Yeah, absolutely. But just first to mention, Jordan, I live in Hume now, and I bought my property here. For 12 years, I rented in West Didsbury, and I think in the early days, I was probably guilty of thinking I wanted everywhere to look like West Didsbury, to be Burton Road, and to have that kind of, you know, that cafe bar offer. And that was, you know, I wanted to regenerate places in that image. And actually, I was completely incorrect. And when it came time to buy somewhere in my mid-30s, we sort of panicked a little bit, thought, shoot, we need to buy something. I never considered Hume. But actually, when I looked at the properties, I looked at the affordability of it, considering it's like 15 minutes walk from here where I live to the town hall, it was a no-brainer. And it's a different place to West Didsbury, but I absolutely love it here. And I sit in Hume Park and I look around, and you can see the attention to detail of the master plan and how it was implemented, and the spacing of the street trees and the species, and the way that the houses front onto the park, and the navigable nature of the streets. I think, you know, there's problems with all regeneration, but there's really big successes in terms of the physical manifestation. I think Hume is absolutely fantastic. And whilst it predates me, I think it is an example that's still held in high regard today of how public and private sectors work in partnership for shared aims. But in terms of the social part of it, yeah, I mean, regeneration is done with people and with communities and not to communities. And I think there has been examples previously where there's a sense that it's being to people, and it's, you know, but they're never going to feel engage and take ownership of it if that's the case. And I think one of our real successful regeneration schemes that our team led on was in West Gorton. And if anybody knows West Gorton, when the first Shameless series was created for Channel 4, the first series was set in West Gorton. And you had people that would say, forget about this area, you're never going to do anything here. And the council did. It took that leadership role, working with private developer, with Keep My Homes and the social housing affordable provider Guinness. And that neighbourhood has been completely transformed. But what we really did well there was to bring the community along on that journey and make them feel like it's their regeneration, because it is their regeneration. And that's been really successful. And there's a huge new park at the heart of that now, which is a cutting edge kind of park in terms of sustainable urban drainage. You know, all of the rainwater that goes into that park is absorbed into that green space, and it improves biodiversity, access to nature, health and well-being, and that really feels like it's a community asset, and that whole neighbourhood is owned by the community.
Thank you, Matt. And that's kind of my area of expertise, kind of drainage. So Sutton and is kind of right down my lane. So yeah.
To visit on a rainy day, which I'm sure you'll have no problem finding one of those.
Yeah, and if you want to meet for a coffee in Hume Park after this, let me know.
Absolutely.
Pat, I'd love to ask you kind of the same questions, but I think your introduction has more so made me want to ask. I think you touched on some of the aspects and partnering with the universities and stuff like that, but who is it that's ultimately driving Manchester's vision from a regeneration standpoint? And what does that vision look like?
Well, I think we've all got a role to play in driving Manchester's vision. I don't think it's the remit of one particular person or organisation over another. I mean, we work in partnership with a whole range of organisations and communities, and you can just see that in the work that's been done around our Manchester. We've recently done a refresh, a huge amount of consultation, asking people's views about the key themes around people, place and prosperity. Hugely important, and that's the centrepiece for the work that we've been doing around our economic recovery and economic growth as a whole. I just wanted to come back on a couple of things, if I may. You said I made a random comment at the start about starting in the region. The reason I made that point is it was just to give a flavour that I'd started in a very different area of work. I did a lot of work when I started with a lot of refugee communities and immigrant communities, and then I moved over time to different jobs and ended up doing a regeneration job. And I think I was trying to demonstrate that the kind of the breadth of the work that I've been involved in the organisation. And Matt made a point about, it's quite difficult to get jobs now. And I think the issue around the difficulty of getting jobs is related to the fact that we are in the situation we're in, and it's not so easy to employ people when you are dealing with financial restraints. So that was the point I was making. I didn't want to go through each and every particular job that I'd done. So just to come on to consultation, I mean, we always take an active role in ensuring that we consult local communities. I mean, we've got more residents in the city centre. My focus is around city centre, although not exclusively. And when I started doing the job I do now, we only had maybe 10,000 residents in the city centre, and we've got 75,000 now, thereabouts. So the world has changed significantly, particularly in the city centre, and it's incumbent on us to ensure that the journey we're on, our growth journey, brings everybody along with it, and everybody has a say in that process, and everybody has a contribution to make to what this city should look like. And you know, what we want other people to think about the city as well.
Just keeping on one of those themes, you mentioned kind of reinvigorating the Manchester's kind of economy. How can Manchester help rebalance the kind of UK economy, and what part does it have to play in that? And mainly to Pat, just to ensure, I feel like, you know, typically government spending is very London centric, or at least that's what we know of, typically, and we're trying to move away from that and have a bit more of a devolved approach. And where are we up to with that? And you know, what's Manchester doing in that space?
So, you know, our objective as a city is to be a net contributor to the UK economy and for the north of England. And that's dependent on our prime economic generators. And if we're able to maximise the contribution of those for the city, we can make that contribution to UK PLC. That does and will require investment, though, to get us to that point. You know, and that's investment in good quality transport to support our zero carbon objectives, to look at things, better improvements to our highways. You know, there's all sorts of things that we want to achieve and can achieve with the right kind of investment. I think the government agenda at the moment around levelling up is an interesting one. Let's see how that pans out. We're just into round one. So let's see how that pans out in terms of how investment is supported and by the government across the UK. That will be an interesting position.
Definitely, and I think that's kind of the high level, national level. Maybe Matt, I'm not sure if you want to answer my next question, but I you know, we have probably a lot of emerging professionals that are mainly consultants or engineers or consultants that work in the built environment, and you know, certainly technically, I feel like through our day-to-day jobs, we build our technical abilities and stuff, but the commercial aspect is one that I feel like a lot of my peers kind of want to develop further in. So a pre-prepared question that I did have for you, Matt, is what is the kind of procurement process for, say, Victoria North, if that's what you're working on, or these large regeneration schemes? And kind of second to that, is it a combination of public and private spending? And if so, when that balance is different, is there any kind of obvious differences in how that scheme is then delivered?
Yeah, there is. It is a mix of public and private, and in fact, you know, the balance has shifted quite a lot over the last couple of decades. You know, the private sector delivers a lot more. I mean, you know, years and years ago, decades ago, the city council, local authorities, they would have city architects and planners and engineers that would design all of the housing, design the municipal buildings. And then they'd have a direct works team that would go ahead and build them all. So it was kind of, you know, very self-sufficient. We're not in that position anymore. A lot of what we do and what Pat does, we commission development frameworks that guide the type of development that we want to see that meets the objectives for the place that we've got for the city. Well, actually, how that's implemented and delivered is through a variety of different organisations and partnerships that we put in place. So, you know, there are where it's public funds. Obviously, we go through public compliant procurement routes, and we'll advertise our needs through the CHEST portal, which is the Northwest Procurement Portal. So we've done that recently. We secured £51.6 million of government funds for an infrastructure project in Victoria North. And I think that relates to your point around levelling up. I mean, we had to go through a lengthy business case process to get that funding, but we're able to demonstrate very clearly the economic benefits of that spend. You know, that spend is going to result in capacity for 5,500 new homes in a very, very sustainable location. That's going to contribute to a lot of our objectives. And having our house in order and being very clear about our priorities, how leveraging investment is going to contribute to those priorities, both for the city, the region, but for the UK economy too. But yeah, just focusing more on your question. our JV partner, FEC, they're essentially going to build the majority of the housing. So they will procure the architects and the designers and the engineers and the planning consultants, and they'll do that through their own procurement policy. If we've got funds that are going in, such as in Collyhurst, where there is going to be, you know, FEC will build the homes, but there's going to be 100 social rented homes that the council will own, then of course that has to be a public sector compliant procurement process, and that's what we're following. So there might be standardised frameworks that we'll use. So for Collyhurst, we've used the Innovate Chain Northwest framework, which is an established framework. And for some consultancy services like planning and design and property, the council has its own frameworks. And again, we'll advertise when we're refreshing those or creating new ones. We'll advertise those through the Chess portal.
Matt, Jordan, can I just ask Matt a question while we're on Far East Consortium? How far is the development protected from any political instability between the UK and China?
Well, FEC they're a Hong Kong company, and we don't want to get too drawn into the relationship between Hong Kong and China and the one country, two systems debate. But in theory, they're autonomous from the Chinese Communist Party. So we have protections in place, notwithstanding where the entity is based, that protects the city council's interests at all times. So you know, we've set up an agreement with FEC whereby if anything untoward was to happen, we could continue with the regeneration of Victoria North. Of course, we're not entertaining that possibility, and we keep a close eye on what's going on in Hong Kong. We have regular board meetings with our directors. So yeah, of course it is. It's an interesting time, isn't it, to be dealing with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Pat, Matt, maybe a best one for you, but Pat in particular, you mentioning being in the race unit, not just because I thought it was random, but as I said after that, I really do feel like some of these key themes that are mentioned at the moment, digitalization, net zero, diversity and inclusion, though they're very different and isolated topics, they're very much intertwined. And I just wanted to, you know, I truly believe some of your experience in them early days surely either directly or indirectly benefits your role now. But as I say, all of those kind of wider topics are integrated. So I'd like to touch on them all. And I feel certainly the commercial and maybe social sides are being touched on. And with the last 10 minutes, I did just want to kind of shift that light to net zero and kind of sustainability. You mentioned Manchester has a 2038 net zero target. And actually, one of those is a sustainability and carbon consultant from Atkins, and is in the committee that I steer. And he actually fired through a question prior to this webinar and wanted me to ask it. So this is a question from Tom at Atkins, and he asked, considering Manchester's 2038 net zero target and the position it needs to take in leading the Northwest region, how is progress being made towards this target and agenda, while simultaneously rolling out the city's regeneration program, which will inherently be a very carbon intensive project?
Thanks, a very interesting question. So I think there's a number of things really. So if I can start with our procurement processes, because I think that was one of the issues that you did raise. So we have social value requirements in there, 20% social value and 10% environment contributions, and we're very strict on adhering to that. So that's already been built into our procurement processes, looking at that low carbon strategy. We are working on having all of our new build being zero carbon by 2028, not 2038. That's what we're working towards at the moment. with this full city working towards zero carbon by 2038. So it is a very ambitious target, but we are really, really keen to achieve it. We are looking at, sorry, just on that, there are real opportunities, I think, for developers, investors in regeneration to get ahead of the game on that basis, because they can look at opportunities to develop the kind of methods that would confer a market advantage on new development at retrofit, whilst we have that agenda. So I think that is, that's an opportunity there in terms of bringing forward new development. We've got policy framework in place to support that climate change agency and partnership, which is overseeing and championing climate change action in the city. And we've got a climate change build standard, which is a framework for all developments delivered by or for the City Council being required to adhere to those standards. And that standard has been endorsed by the Climate Change Partnership. So, there is a very serious approach to working towards zero carbon. There are other things, we're looking at how we reduce general traffic in the city centre. We're looking at, over time, we want to move more car parking to the periphery of the city centre, have more active travel, walking and cycling, to have bus re-regulation. We'll be able to look at how buses use the streets as well. So there's lots of different areas that we're looking at the moment. Some of it will take time. These things aren't going to change overnight, but we are very actively driving forward that agenda.
That's great.
Can I just jump in there very briefly, Jordan, because I'm doing a piece of work at the moment with city councillors in Hume and neighbourhood officers in Hume, and I can just give you an insight. You're talking there, Pat, about the bigger picture. Of course, it always drills down, and there's lots of effort on the ground. I'll give you one example of that, is the idea of junior PCSOs in primary schools in Hume, who've been trained by regular PCSOs, and they literally don a hat and go out and stand on the pavement and ask parents to stop idling their cars, stop parking their cars there, encourage people to walk to school. So there are bigger things going on. Thank you, Pat. But there are tiny things that are going on as well, which are making a big impact. So it crosses, I think the climate change agenda now used to be, it used to be niche. Of course, now it's mainstream, and every organisation from big to small is now on their agenda, which is great.
I think it's a great point, Len, and any big change, any revolutionary change, I think needs to happen at all levels, top down, bottom up, left, right, all aspects. So
lots more needs to happen, of course.
Absolutely.
Things are going on.
Yeah, absolutely, Len. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's only by, every individual taking that responsibility and making that their own responsibility, are we going to actually make the changes that we need?
Exactly.
Done by an organisation over there or a person over there. We've all got to be involved in that process to actually effect that change.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we're at the last few minutes, so I'll ask the final question. I've seen quite a few questions have come in. I have been reading them and hopefully feeding them in. There's quite a lot of overlap with some of the kind of questions I had prepared. But I'm happy we've kind of landed on the sustainability kind of side of things, because if there is a message to take home this morning, or keep home, because I imagine you're working from home maybe, in my opinion, it certainly would be the social and environmental aspect as opposed to the commercial per se. But on that note, this is an open question to anyone who feels like they're keen to answer. But once a regeneration scheme is complete, how do we keep driving opportunities forward?
I'm happy to come in there if you want, Jordan. I think for us, it's about how we use the places and spaces for outdoor events and activities. When we look at development, we always take a whole place approach. So we don't just look at individual buildings, we look at how those buildings relate to each other, what are the connections, how do people move about in that area, what kind of open space is available. So I think using that space to best effect, activities that people want to take part in is really important. You know, and in lots of our communities as well, we've got neighbourhood forums, and we always, you know, there's one in Castlefield, there's one in the Gay Village, particularly in the city centre. So, and we encourage them to take an active role in things that happen in their area to make it attractive for people who live and work there, but also visitors. So I think it's that sort of approach. I think in the world we're in now, we may need to take a different approach as to how we look at ground floors of buildings, you know, that they may have to be used differently. And that's something that's not just being explored by us, but lots of other people as well. So I think it's all of those things really. Looking at places and spaces, looking at how we use some of our buildings, and making sure that people feel engaged with what's happening in that particular area, so they can contribute to that and do different things there that make it an attractive place to live and work and visit.
Awesome.
Yeah. I agree with you, Jordan. I mean, cities evolve, they adapt, they always have done and they always will do. And I think we've now left that cycle that we had in the 20th century where, you know, new ideas come in, build loads of stuff, 25 years later, it's out of date, out of fashion, it's not fit for purpose, and we demolish it. I mean, Hume, where I live, that was completely wholesale developed twice in the 20th century. And it links to that sustainability point. We're beyond that now, but we still have to recognise that cities will continue to evolve and we'll have to continue to adapt to them. And I think we'll react where we need to react, and we'll be proactive like we have done with our city centre here in Manchester. And you look at kind of where high street retail is now and COVID impact, and we'll continue to evolve and continue to adapt.
Let's hope, because I think we need to. I personally I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm massively grateful for the three panelists that have joined us today. I'll send a follow-up email to reaffirm that thanks. But I'm also very grateful for everyone who joined this morning. I hope you benefited from this webinar. And as I say, I hope you enjoy the next stage of easing of restrictions next week, and have a lovely day. Take care, everyone, and all of the best.
Cheers, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you, Jordan.